I'm the past president.
After this meeting.
Joe's a past president.
So, so I'm presenting on behalf of Sohad Marar, who's a mentee of mine, also a research scientist at MTW. And I'm the PI of this project that both Dr. Azam and I will present. And I'm taking the quantitative part, she'll talk about the qualitative. But let me lay some background context for you all. So we all know these things, right? That workforce diversity offers, I don't know what's going on next, but offers multiple benefits, both at the patient level and the societal level. And that religion strongly influences the practice of physicians, right? Particularly in the United States. So this is something that we all know from a lot of large sets of data, as well as sort of commentaries on the healthcare workforce. However, there's a problem with both of these contexts, right? Significant numbers of physicians from minority backgrounds encounter workplace discrimination. I could go through the list of literature on that, but from 20 to 30% amongst Latinos, it's almost 70% is in national surveys of African American physicians. And that leads to job turnover and career dissatisfaction amongst those minority groups. We can talk about that for gender minorities or other minorities as well. I mean, while we know that religion strongly influences the practice of physicians, we know that DEI efforts, right, often overlook religious identity of physicians. They focus on other features, and that religion-related discrimination and strategies for accommodation are not only understudied, they're less well known, right? So that's the context that we're going to address with the presentation. So the study that I want to present had this real significant aim to examine relationships between physician religiosity, perceived discrimination and accommodation, sociodemographic characteristics, and job-related outcomes. That was held through the Medical College of Wisconsin in partnership with several organizations, including a nonprofit initiative on Islamic medicine. So we recruited our sample from 3 national Muslim clinician organizations for both for mixed methods work survey plus interviews. And the 2 prominent organizations amongst those were the Islamic Medical Association of North America, you see their logo there, and American Muslim Health Professionals. And the people that we wanted to participate in our study had to be English speaking, self-identify as Muslim, so this is a Muslim study, and worked at a university affiliated hospital the last 20 years in the United States. This work was funded by the Greenwald Foundation. So just another background sort of slide. Who are American Muslim physicians? This is somewhat dated, but they comprise over 5% of the physician workforce. They're a significant source of international medical graduates, which are obviously a significant source of the workforce in the United States. So you can see there's many countries have a significant amount of Muslims that come to the United States for practice. In terms of social characteristics, they're very socially active and highly religious. They actually are more religious based on survey data than the general Muslim population. It's a high value profession in the community. One study said that it's the #1 profession that high school students in the Muslim community aspire towards, and they're more civically active post 9/11. So this was the survey component, had various validated measures of religiosity, discrimination, accommodation, and job outcomes. I can bore you with those details, but these were all measures that have been used in national physician surveys by my group as well as others. So here's the results. I'm speaking through this. Right? So who came and took the study, the survey? So this 264 participants, I have highlighted things they should pay attention to. So our sample was predominantly males, so 2/3 male, 1/3 female. The other a diverse group of race and ethnicity. So you'll see here, South Asians were the most dominant group, 33%, but we also had 16% African Americans, 28% white Caucasians. They were the majority born in the United States, you see there 59%. In terms of wearing a hijab or beard, both visible markers of religiosity, over half the sample did that. And then they're predominantly Sunni Muslim, but again, we had a good percentage of Shia Muslims as well. In terms of where they worked, so presently, right, obviously they all had to work within an academic setting in the last 20 years. The dominant characteristic of this was that people worked in their own offices, single specialty group, right? Some were a third about teaching hospitals, most were US medical graduates, so this is not the IMG population that I just talked about, the homegrown population. Most spoke English as a primary language. And when they were asked, what is the most targeted social identity that you have in terms of discrimination in healthcare, right, in the workplace, it was religion, nearly half, right? But race was not insignificant with 20%. No, the race was the most targeted social identity they had. In terms of religiosity, again, just laying the groundwork, I told you, right, that Muslim American physicians are more religious than the general population of Muslim Americans, and this bore true here as well, right? So in terms of religious importance, almost 3/4 said that it was highly important. The most highly important, it was important, the highest aspect of their life was determined by religion. And then in terms of intrinsic religiosity, you see again, almost 75% held that statement to be true. This is part of the Durrell measure that we kind of summed up together. So point being, very religious, American-born group, not IMGs, right? Diverse population. So I'm going to spend a minute of my time on this slide, just giving you this sort of frequency of what we found. And the reason why this slide has not green, it has red, is purposeful. Red means bad. This is all bad. So in 2013, I did a national survey of Muslim physicians on discrimination that they faced. This 2021 survey I'm playing now is somewhat of a replication of parts of those measures. All the red arrows point to increases in badness. Right? So in terms of frequency of experiencing religious discrimination at the workplace, right, over their career, you'll notice that more than half the sample said that they were experiencing over their career religious discrimination. Experiencing it currently, right, 36%. This is up from 14% in 2013. If we asked them whether they've been passed over for professional advancement because of their religious identity, over half the sample agree with that statement. And the pass was maybe 24%. Did they leave a job because of discrimination? Well, almost a third said they had, right, compared to 7% in 2013. Were there more scrutinized at work because of the religious identity? Again, over 50%, 54% felt that because of their religion, similar to what was in 2013. Did they report struggling to find time for prayer? Same as 2013, half the sample reported that. And from patients, so that's all infrastructure, supervisor level of discrimination. From patients, 9% in 2013 said that they had patients refuse their care because they perceived the provider to be Muslim. Here, over 33%. As I said, all badness, that's all gotten worse, right, in terms of descriptive characteristics of the population. So now into the model building, where we found religiosity was somewhat of a predictor of some of these things. So I'm going to kind of build up the model here. These are all multivariate models. We controlled for race, ethnicity, and other things as well. So they're all independently significant things I'll share with you. So let's talk about religion. So starting with the last thing at the end about refusing care, right? 33% somewhat completely agree that patients refuse their care. You'll notice here that those who had more congregational religious activity, they attend mosques more often, right, to pray, or had lower odds of reporting this. What does that mean? I'm not quite sure, but that's what we found. However, in terms of religious importance, right, the odds ratio is 3.78. More times of higher odds of reporting that patients really their care because if people felt that religion was important to their life. In terms of the currently experiencing discrimination, right, 36% were currently experiencing discrimination at work. Again, there was a buffering effect here. So those who had more private religious activities, that read the Quran more, or have more private activities, they've had a lower odds of reporting this, right, that they felt current discrimination at work. This is the distinction, right? The fact that they're not doing it visibly and going to congregations, they're just doing their own thing on the side. In terms of race ethnicity, significant predictions here were that compared to African Americans, every other group within our sample, Arabs, South Asians, Europeans, whites, had lower rates of discrimination, lower odds. So just to give you a sense from our chart perspective, let's look at those last two columns, right? So experiencing religious discrimination by race over their career, you notice that African Americans are the highest, right? But they're not reporting racial, they're reporting religious discrimination. Right? Now, I don't want to diminish the fact that Arab Americans, South Asians also have high rates as well. In terms of current workplace discrimination, you'll see here that I've highlighted for you the somewhat agree percentage, right? Which I thought was interesting, that even white Americans here are reporting religious discrimination at the workplace, right? Oftentimes we don't think about that, okay, because we don't think about religious identity. They were here almost at level 40%. Okay, so now the outcomes. So the two outcomes I'll present to you are leaving a job because of discrimination at workplace. Again, almost a third of the population reported that. And we had a measure of depression. And this I didn't show in the first slide set. 47% screened positive for depression amongst the sample. That's extremely high for a physician sample, right? And it was related to religious discrimination. So in terms of religiosity, again, those who had more congregational activity had a buffering effect. There's a lower odds of leaving a job because of discrimination. Those who carried their higher level of intrinsic religiosity carried their sort of religion into the workplace. They also had a buffering effect, right, against depression. But those who felt that religion was the most important part of their life had higher odds of being depressed. And again, the same thing about race ethnicity. Compared to African Americans, every other group had lower odds of reporting these outcomes. So what does this mean? So I'll just kind of talk about religious identity, right? So for many populations, I already gave you the data for general sort of the US physician workforce, 50% carry their religion, think it's important in their medical practice. So it could be a calling, right, why they go into medicine. But in this population, it attracts discrimination. Those who believe religion is an important part of their life, that leads to increased or related to increased perceptions of discrimination from both patients and increased risk of depression because of their workplace environment. Those who participate in prayer activities, congregational ones particularly, which is difficult, obviously, if you're at work, there's a buffering effect against those bad outcomes. As I mentioned several times already, African Americans have higher rates of sort of these bad outcomes compared to Arab and South Asians. So anti-Muslim sentiment is truly alive and well in medicine. What does that mean for us as a society? Well, if some groups of physicians face discrimination or other sorts of disincentives to be in a certain environment, remember these are all academic environment-based physicians, then high quality patient care suffers and so does social equity. And I will end with what I started with, that diversity and inclusion programming must extend programs to policies to cover religious identity and accommodation. We have neglected that, and I think this is one population that shows the harms in neglect. And then you should listen to Dr. Leila. That's it.
We have time for probably one, maybe two questions.
Sir.
Thank you. A wonderful presentation. I was curious if you had any reflections on organizations looking to push back on or who are concerned about the patients refusing care. And you said the numbers jumped to 33%. So I'm trying to think how to balance supporting the physicians and nurses doing this good work while not turning patients away given the oaths health practitioners take.
So I think that's a hot ethical debate, right? And I don't want to give you my view here, but there are, as you said, there's this sort of like pendulum. Is it patients' rights, right, and patient care, or is it physicians and professionals? And I'll tell you that there have been a lot of legal suits now. The pendulum has swung to providers, right? So there's these statements you put on the wall that we will not tolerate harassment, so on and so forth. I'm an ER physician, so that doesn't necessarily apply to my setting of work, right? Where you might have an acute condition that's leading to you acting out in a certain way. But there's a lot more suits happening now because of that, in terms of we want to support nurses and clinicians to not feel discriminated against.
Thank you.
So, yes.
We discussed this in a session yesterday, and there was the conflict between the system saying, this is your doctor. You know, you don't have a choice. This is a well-trained doctor, this is the doctor. And the fact that in the VA system, you're not permitted to do that. The VA does not fire patients.
Correct.
Ever for anything. They try to contain it, but you can't say, if you behave like this, you cannot stay in our institution, assuming patient is stable.
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, we can say that at the VA, but there are other places where there's only one mega hospital you can go to, right? And so if you yourself, I mean, that's also a problem, right? That they will have no care. You can't sort of refer them somewhere else for their transplant because it's the only place they can get the transplant, right? But I will say for this group, and I want to kind of let Dr. Osmond speak. I think Austin can tell you focus on the wrong thing. The institution is not supporting physicians in doing their lives. Patients is another thing, right? Because we have an oath to patients. But what about the institutions that are neglecting the fact that this group is suffering and not feeling they're depressed because their workplace doesn't accommodate their identity, right? That's a bigger problem than just patient care. And I think that's the wrong focus. That if you leave my talk, at least, you think about it as a patient level issue. It's an institutional level issue. All right.
Is there any way
To fix that, I'm trying, I can go grab a tech person. In the meantime, Joe, you might want to try to slide, because we have it up on the TV screen here, but it's not working up here. So if you want to go ahead.
Do you want to move them and I'll ask him to come and look at that?
Yeah, that would be.
And you can move it along to Layla.
So while we are working on fixing slides, I want to welcome Layla Azim. And as Dr. Padilla had just noted, she's been working with him and continuing this work around our Muslim physicians and concerns about racism within that sphere. So I will turn that over to you.
Yes, thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear you.
Okay, great. It's a privilege to be with you today. And I will go ahead and build off of Dr. Padella's talk.
She said she'd still.
So we did hear a lot of bad stuff, but let's hear a little bit of some good stuff. Why are we doing all this work, right? And really discussing the importance of diversity and its benefits. So we've been discussing this topic for a very long time, and there is and at this time we are demanding change. Like this is the time where we are seeing movements and a demand for change. And the ultimate goal is really to create an environment that recognizes the values that differences, bring to an organization, and then they allow those differences to be expressed and practiced. And that's going to ultimately help organizations achieve their mission and vision. And so building a diverse physician workforce is essential to advancing workforce equity and critical for advancing health and healthcare equity. And this graphic that you see here, it's from the Association of American Medical Colleges. It really gives a nice visual and way of illustrating how the three dimensions of diversity, inclusion, and equity, when combined, what their benefits are, and when they incorporate diversity, inclusion, and equity to achieve excellence. So as we heard, there are challenges. There's a lot of challenges, and the challenges of achieving workforce equity can be frustrated by these experiences the physicians are having, Muslim physicians specifically, that group that we know little about. And so in some of the studies that Dr. Padella just talked to you about, we heard more about one group that we know little about, those religious groups, in particular the Muslim physicians. But with the previous work, you can see that they are experiencing religious discrimination. And thus, continuing this work is important. We wanted to get more of their voice. We wanted to interview the physicians and include that narrative around the data, the quantitative data. And this study will help us really understand that population more and why they interface with discrimination and accommodation in academic medicine. So the study objectives for the qualitative work includes examining Muslim physicians' experiences with discrimination and accommodation and identifying those barriers to the inclusion of Muslim physicians within academic medicine. And so doing all of this, our work will describe the challenges to DEI in academic medicine and provide that data to help design those solutions to social exclusion and incorporating religious identity in the workplace, in the healthcare workplace. And so these are similar methods. We use this community engaged research approach to recruit participants from these three Muslim clinician organizations. We also used maximum variation purposive sampling to contact our interviewees according to their racial, ethnic, and biological sex characteristics. And so the sampling continued until thematic saturation regarding religious practices, observances that attract discrimination, and which ones require accommodation were reached. So in this study, we had 18 participants, and mostly were female and South Asian. Again, they regard religion as very important in their life, and the sample was nearly split evenly among international and US medical graduates. The themes, there were three main themes around struggles of religious practices and observances, experiences of religious discrimination, and suggestions for religious accommodation. So as you know, Islam played a central role in their life. So that meant that these participants had to manage their religious practices, such as fasting and prayer, as well as observances such as diet, holidays, and dress at work. So they had to figure out how to incorporate their religious practices at work. For the sake of time, I will highlight a few of the participant experiences throughout the presentation, and then I'll allow you to read the other quotes. I'll start out with Ramadan and fasting. So Ramadan's the 9th month of the Islamic calendar, observed by Muslims worldwide as a month of fasting, prayer, reflection, and community. So most participants actually made their own accommodations, adjusting their schedules to fast or be able to break their fast with flexible hours, but they made those accommodations on their own. There was some institutional support, but that was also variable in how they would support the physicians during the month. For daily prayers, Muslims are obligated to pray 5 times a day. And out of the 18 participants, 14 managed this practice by finding places to pray on their own or taking discrete breaks. Now, Friday prayers, this is the Jum'ah service. It's a hallmark of Muslim life and a communal obligation for Muslim males. This one might be this one's harder in terms of time management, because if it's on site, that would take maybe an hour. And if they have to go off site to complete the service, then it could take up to 2 hours. So some were stressed around making arrangements and accommodations without formal structures. And one participant said, coworkers have questioned why I take 2 hours lunch break for Fridays, and then my manager has to give an explanation. And then for religious observances, around the dietary regulations in Islam, it prohibits alcohol and pork consumption and keeping halal. Additionally, it also, Islamic law strongly discourages participating in events with alcohol. So there were some issues around comfort and being able to attend these events. For holidays, Muslims have 2 major holidays, and most participants, well, actually, I'm sorry, half of the participants said that the institution did not recognize the holiday, leaving them to figure out accommodations for themselves. So that they would just have to figure out how they would cover those shifts. And then finally, for dress, traditionally women wear hijab and men are recommended to wear beard. The woman who chose not to wear hijab and men who had no beards gave personal reasons as to why they blend or hide their identity. And then for the ones who did dress Islamically, they experienced more microaggressions and were questioned. One participant said, in medical school, when I was scrubbing into the OR, there were some nurses who would really give me a hard time about wearing a long sleeve shirt under my scrubs or about wearing a hijab into the OR. I didn't want to think it was just religious discrimination. And then now for experiences of religious discrimination, we had these domains in terms of levels of discrimination occurred at 4 levels: at the institutional, leadership, colleague, and patient level. And then for actions, participants took both formal and informal action to address religious discrimination. Some would go to HR, the university's dean, and would complain, but despite employees speaking up and escalating their issues to superiors, participants were dissatisfied. And then for impact, this domain focuses on the downstream effects of religious discrimination on participant career, their psychological health, and religiosity. I'll focus on career here, and one, as illustrated by one participant saying, I'm just fed up. The reason I stayed here so long is I love what I do. I can see patients as a clinician and do research, but if they didn't treat me this way, I wouldn't have left. But after 15 years, I've had enough. And then, so now we're getting to suggestions. We asked our participants, what would you like to see happen in terms of accommodations, what policies, what best practices do you want? And so these are the categories that they brought up: making accommodations for prayer time, having policies around Ramadan and holidays. Dietary preferences should include taking into account halal and vegetarian options, and then asking for preferences for hijab and dress code, and also providing that apparel, and then having a faith-based liaison who could actually communicate those needs. Ultimately, workplace equity surfaces to the top because this is the foundation. This will build the foundation when they can actually collect data on religious identity and then address these needs. And one participant said, every promotion, every job, every grant is open to I should have as much access to it like anybody else, but it's not assumed that I wouldn't be interested. Now, overall, like I said, what does this all mean? Summing this all up, overall, many participants engage in self-accommodations rather than being granted religious accommodations by their employer. These negative experiences would leave them, they would leave the academy or may decline in their religious practices because it's harder. And then they would experience psychological distress in terms of anxiety and fear for not being able to, or when they are trying to observe or make accommodations for their religious practices. That ultimately takes away from workforce equity. And so, we really need to create an organizational strategy that engages with religious identity so that workforce equity is advanced, and understanding that we can't just keep doing what we're doing, and that you're all here to help us achieve that, to implement these accommodations and needs. Thank you.